Okay. Okay. I think I'm sharing.
Yes, you are.
Okay. I have been fooled before. You guys remember now, Paul had been determined to get back to Jerusalem. He felt like the Holy Spirit had compelled him to go to Jerusalem, and his desire after he went back to Jerusalem was to go to Rome. So he'd come back to Jerusalem, presented the financial gift that they had collected over a period of time back through Macedonia and Asia, Greece, those areas, brought them back to the churches in Judea. And Paul had gotten together with James and the elders of the church there in Jerusalem, and he told them about all the wonderful things that God had done through his ministry among the Gentiles. And then they had informed Paul that this was it. See here, it says, and when they heard it, this is in chapter 21 here. They glorified the Lord and said to him, "You see, brother, how many myriads of Jews there are who have believed, and they're all zealous for the law. But they have been informed about you." So Paul had a bad name among the Christians in Jerusalem, that you teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, saying that they ought not to circumcise their children, nor to walk according to the customs. What then? So James has got a plan how Paul can improve his standing among the Christians in Jerusalem. So what then? The assembly, talking about the church, must certainly meet, for they will hear that you have come. Therefore, do what we tell you. We have 4 men who have taken a vow. Take them and be purified with them, and pay their expenses, so that they may shave their heads, and that all may know that those things of which they were informed concerning you are nothing, but that you yourself also walk orderly and keep the law. And then he reiterated what they had decided back in chapter 15, when they had what was called the Jerusalem Council concerning Gentiles and the law. But concerning the Gentiles who believe, we have written and decided that they should observe no such thing, except that they should keep themselves from things offered to idols, from blood, from things strangled, and from sexual immorality. We're not given a whole lot of detail here about to what extent these Jewish Christians were keeping the law, but he said they were very zealous for it. So, and the rumor was getting back to the church there in Jerusalem that Paul was teaching things contrary to all of that. And we'll see some more accusations that's going to come from non-Christian. We assume they're non-Christian Jews coming up pretty soon. Anyway, that's where we left off last week, right there at the end of 25. So it sets us up for this week. So Paul is going to, as we see here, he's going to do what James suggested. He's going to go through with that plan to try to convince the Jews in Jerusalem that he is not against the law, he's not against the temple, and he's not against the Jewish people. So hey, Jim, how'd you like to read there, at least through verse 29? Yeah. So
okay. Then Paul took them in, and the next day, having been purified with them, entered the temple to announce the expiration of the days of purification, at which time an offering should be made for each one of them. Now, when the 7 days were almost ended, the Jews from Asia, seeing him in the temple, stirred up the whole crowd and laid hands on him, crying out, "Men of Israel, help! This is the man who teaches all men everywhere against the people, the law, and this place. And furthermore, he also brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled this holy place." For they had previously seen Trophimus the Ephesian with him in the city, whom they supposed that Paul had brought into the temple. So what was the process to get purified back then?
I don't remember all the details, but I think it's in Leviticus where it talks about the Nazirite laws. There's a process that went through. These have been 4 men who had made a vow. And we saw fairly recently in the book of Acts where Paul had taken a vow and he went back to Jerusalem to finish his vow that he had made. So even just the fact of that showed that Paul still at least honored some of the customs of the Jewish law. One thing they did was at the end was they would shave their heads and bring their hair in, and their hair would be burnt. But they had to bring in certain things for little sacrifices. I think they had to bring a grain offering, and I really can't remember if there's any animals involved in it, but certain things they had to do. So that's like when James said, you know, you pay for it. So there was some kind of financial cost to completing the vow. You know, maybe they had to buy the things that they were going to bring in for their offering. I think they had to give a certain amount of silver, like a silver coin or something at the end. Like I say, it's been a while since I actually studied the Nazirite vow, but this is probably what they were going through. So it's like an offering should be made for each one of them. So that would have included some kind of financial expense. I don't think it was just limited to money. So.
And there he's crying out, men of Israel, help. So there he is calling out the people that are working against God's word. And it's kind of interesting, even in today's world, you know, when you have somebody telling the truth, you got other people that don't believe the truth and want to make that person the evil person.
Yeah. Now think about who these guys are that's doing that yelling out, because they've seen Paul, they've seen him in Ephesus, and they've seen this guy in Ephesus. So these are probably Ephesian Jews who were not believers, obviously. And they see Paul, and like I got it, you know, here in parentheses that they supposed Paul had brought into the temple. But, you know, there was a court, an outer court there where Gentiles could go into. It was open to anybody in the world that wanted to go into a certain area of the, when they say temple here, it's not necessarily inside the building, but there were different courtyards. So and obviously there were certain areas of the temple that most people never went into. Only certain priests could go into. And then the Holy of Holies, where only the high priest could go once a year. But there was an area that the Gentiles could go into. And supposedly, according to Josephus, a historian from back from that time period, said that inside the perimeter of the court for the Gentiles, with signs all around it in several languages, warning anybody who crossed past that point that they themselves were guilty for their own death if they cross that line. In other words, if you cross here, you're going to die. So these guys are assuming that Paul has taken this Gentile across that line. So not only would Trophimus, didn't say anything about him, he's not there, but anybody who would take a Gentile past that line would be guilty as a Gentile. And at that time, the Romans actually allowed capital punishment for the Jews when it came to that particular issue. Otherwise, the Jews did not have authority to carry out a death penalty. But the Jews were authorized to carry out the death penalty if somebody blasphemed or, you know, violated crossing that line into the area they didn't belong in the temple. In fact, if somebody who was not a high priest went into a place where a high priest would go, they would be killed. So there were certain places that people just didn't go. And like the sign said, the blood, you know, it's your fault. You brought it on yourself. You died because of yourself. So you see that they stir up the whole crowd, you know, and grab Paul. So, and they're yelling out, trying to get everybody else. And you see what they said here. They're saying the same thing in here that even the Jewish Christians were saying about Paul. He teaches men everywhere against the people, against the law, and against the place, this temple. So.
So are you thinking that some of these people that are bringing forth these charges might have been from Ephesus, where he had those conflicts in the past,
Oh, absolutely.
all throughout Asia? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they knew Paul. They recognized him when they saw him, you know. So they remembered him from Ephesus, and they were not his friends.
Yeah.
And it's obviously they recognized this guy too. So, so he must have had some kind of prominence in Ephesus that these visitors to Jerusalem would remember. Paul has come at the time of Pentecost, so that would have brought in Jewish people from all over the known world at that time. Would have come there for a pilgrimage. So,
do you think Paul actually brought the sacrifice in? I looked it up. It's number 6. And when your days of the Nazirite vow are fulfilled, you bring in one male lamb without blemish and a basket of unleavened bread cakes of fine flour with oil. But it says that in 26 that at which time an offering should be made for each one of them. So you think Paul actually brought that spotless male lamb in?
Yeah, I think he probably did, or else he wouldn't be fulfilling the. There would be no fulfillment of this vow if he didn't.
Because then you put that in and you shave your head at the door of the temple, and then you offer your hair.
Yeah. Now we don't know if Paul is he going through this or not? I don't know if it says, but it says he's doing it. Well, it does say being purified with them. So I don't know if he took the vow and had to do any of this for himself, but there was a purification process to actually go into the temple. Okay. So that was something that anybody would have had to do to go into where they went, would have had to go through a purification process, whether they were part of the vow or not. Yeah, you know, it's kind of Paul would have known that whatever they were doing with the sacrifice, it definitely was not taking the place of what Jesus did on the cross. And so a lot of us have an issue with, you know, why would Paul even be involved in this at all? But it's interesting too. We see, I didn't take the time to look it up, but somewhere in the scriptures, it tells us that during the millennial reign, there will be sacrifices going on in the new temple. So, but they'll be looking back at the cross and not forward to the cross. So there was a lot of confusion and stuff still going on at this time. I think that's one reason that the writer of Hebrews wrote the book of Hebrews is the Jews were having a hard time getting away from the sacrifices and all the rituals and things. And I think I might have mentioned briefly last week that I think for Christianity's sake, the temple being destroyed was a good thing. It made that total break.
Well, if you go back to verse 24, the end of it, and James is telling Paul that you yourself also walk orderly and keep the law. So I think Paul was keeping the law because that's what he was instructed by James to do.
Yeah, well, we know Paul kept some of the laws before. We know he had done one of these particular vows himself a while back.
Right.
So since he'd already done something like this, it's not too far out of reason to think that he could, you know, go with these 4 young men through that same process. So, good morning, Jack.
Good morning.
Good morning.
But the Jews were still on this thing that you see in 25 here. But concerning the Gentiles who believe, we've decided that they should observe no such thing. Okay. But we do see that the Jewish mindset at this point in time in the church, you know, still in the early change, if you think about it, they're still saying that the Jews need to do the Jewish things. Now, I don't know if they were into like the Day of Atonement, that kind of stuff, you know, the sacrificial lamb. Personally, I haven't seen that in any of my readings and stuff, how far they went with any of that. but there definitely was certain things that they were saying they needed to do. So, yeah, Paul, Paul is, it said somewhere else before, I'm all things to all men. And I'm the Gentiles, I'm a Gentile. When I'm the Jews, I'm the Jew. He said that was like it was a good thing, so we'll assume it was a good thing. But he said he did all those things so that he might win some to Christ. So, however, I don't think Paul was saying that I will go in and participate with sinners to show the sinners, try to win sinners to Christ by sinning. So, I don't think we want to go that way. But when Paul was around the Jewish people, he did Jewish things. But we do know too that when there were Jews and Gentiles together, that Paul didn't separate himself like a good Jew would do. Remember how he had to get after Peter when Peter came to Antioch, and Peter pulled himself away from the Gentiles there at Antioch and wouldn't eat with them. And Paul came out and chastised him right in front of everybody, like, why are you doing this? So there are certain things, but remember this, some of the things that the Jews did were not really things that God had told them. They were traditions of the elders, traditions they had come up with. So Paul would definitely differentiate between those and what God had commanded. Just totally being antisocial toward a Gentile is not something God ever told him to do. So he told them not to become like the Gentiles, in their worship of false gods and in their the evil practices they had. But he didn't tell them don't ever have anything to do with a Gentile. But they had taken that upon themselves. So. But I think it's really it's really interesting to me how the Jews who had seen Paul in Ephesus, some of them there showed up and they recognized Paul and go, hey, there's that troublemaker. They hadn't been able to get him before, but now here's our chance, right? Because we're here surrounded by Jews, there's not going to be any Gentiles there to come to his rescue. It's all Jews there. So. Tom, you want to read 30 through 34? So.
I'm getting there. I tried to switch Bibles.
Okay.
34. And all the city was disturbed, and the people ran together, seized Paul, and dragged him out of the temple. And immediately the doors were shut. Now, as they were seeking to kill him, news came to the commander of the garrison that all Jerusalem was in an uproar. He immediately took soldiers and centurions and ran down to them. And when they saw the commander and the soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. Then the commander came near and took him and commanded him to be bound with 2 chains. And he asked who he was and what he had done. And some among the multitude cried one thing and some another. So when he could not ascertain the truth because of the tumult, he commanded him to be taken into the barracks. This little section here, it's kind of weird that you even asked me to read it. I guess right off the bat, in the past 2 weeks, it kind of hit me upside the head. I had a presupposition in my head about miracles. I think unknowingly that sometimes miracles, all of them, were of that supernatural type, where like someone was blind, Jesus just touches them, and now they open their eyes. But in reality, God uses certain elements, and he'll often use other people to actually make that miracle happen. Like an example, just kind of unrelated, like, I don't know, your house burns down and you're like, oh Lord, please help me. Next thing you know, some rich guy walks down your street and like, man, I feel bad for you. Let me buy you a new house. Well, the Lord just used that guy to actually answer your prayer for that miracle. And the reason I'm saying that is these guys were about to kill Paul. That centurion or the commander of that little garrison, I don't know it, but it's likely that those events were set up because by that centurion intervening, he likely saved Paul's life. And to me, that's the Lord's hand at work. And Paul is bound with two chains, which fulfills what we just read 2 chapters earlier when that Jew came up to him, or one of his companions, and he took off his belt and bound his hands. He's like, "You're going to be bound in Jerusalem." Well, that was just fulfilled right here, but it was also fulfilled by Paul getting his life saved because that crowd was probably ready to beat him to death. So in one sense, a miracle happened that his life was saved, but it wasn't necessarily the outcome that you might expect. My life was just saved, but now I just got seized by the centurions and I'm going to get dragged away by them. So it's also an example of the Lord working in mysterious ways. We might not understand it, but what is Isaiah 40:10? If I'm not mistaken, the Lord's ways are way above our ways. We'll never understand the way God works. And even at that, it was just a few days ago, there's a mathematician, I forgot his name, but he was so involved with math that he actually went crazy, trying to understand math at its deepest level. Us trying to understand the way God works, how he numbered the stars, he counted them, he's named the stars, he's laid the foundations of the earth. He counts all the hairs on every human being's head. He knows our thoughts. That's insane. That's how powerful God is. So his ways are above ours. So maybe Paul at the time, like, man, I just got arrested, but I also just got my life saved. It's the Lord's hand at work. So all of that's just, it's amazing. God's awesome. We'll never understand him, but all things do work together for the good of those that love the Lord. Let me stop pontificating. That's it. I'm done. Sorry.
But to
That was
add
good.
to that, God still has work for him to do, so he couldn't die. So
Yeah,
God is saving him to continue his mission.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Tom, you're right on with what you're saying there. And, there's so many times we just don't notice God's hand at work in our lives. But yeah, that's I'd go along with you. That was definitely God getting those soldiers out there to save Paul's life. And,
Yeah.
and you mentioned the prophecy there about him being bound, but it also said part of that prophecy he'd be turned over to the Gentiles. So the Jews are trying to kill him, and then God fulfills the rest of that warning he had given. Now he's handed over to the Gentiles, but being handed over to the Gentiles turned out to be a good thing. It's kind of like that old thing, well, that was a bad thing. No, that was a good thing. Then you go a little longer, say, well, that was a good thing. Then you go, no, that was a bad thing. And that story goes back and forth to you. Sometimes we don't live long enough to know the good thing from the bad thing, but the word tells us that all things together for good. But I think you're right. Sometimes we really want to see that miracle, that spectacular display, and then not aware of all the little miracles that God's doing in our life every day.
Yeah.
I like the one you gave about the house there. That's a good example. So I think that's awesome. So I was watching that was several days ago, David Guzik teaching on part of this passage anyway, and he was actually teaching it from Jerusalem quite a few years ago. So it's an old video, but they had actually broadcast it back to his home church in Santa Barbara. And he was standing right there on these steps that Paul was standing on. And I didn't know, but this garrison was right next door to the temple. So it was close. And part of the reason they say they think they built it there was so that they could put down any riots really quickly that might originate from there, from the the religious Jews, the zealots. So that's another good thing, that it was built right there. They hear about it and they come running down. And if you guys remember, we've seen a couple other places there where it's like, hey, we got to put down this riot here. Even the non-believers. If the Romans hear about this, we're in trouble. how do we explain this riot we had today? That was like in Ephesus, we can't be having this going on here. So the Romans believed in keeping the peace. And these guys, as we'll find out here in a moment, they're used to having uprisings in Jerusalem. So, in fact, we find out in 69 AD, 70 AD that the Jews tried to uprise again, and that one didn't work out well either. So he's got soldiers down there. And the good thing is these people had a lot of respect for the soldiers. It's like, whoa, we better stop this. These soldiers are coming. We might be the ones that get beat up next. So now they're going to take him into the barracks. I probably should have had Tom read 35. When he reached the stairs, he had to be carried by the soldiers because they're taking him into the barracks, and they're going to take him up the stairs into the barracks because of the violence of the mob. But a multitude of people followed after, crying out, "Away with him!" So
I just have a comment on the beginning of that,
sure.
where it says that they seized him, they dragged him out of the temple, and immediately the doors were shut because they were seeking to kill him. So they didn't want to violate the temple by killing him inside.
Right.
So they closed the doors, and then it was okay to kill him.
Yeah. And according to what they had there, if he was really guilty of taking a Gentile into the area he wasn't supposed to be, the Romans had given him authority to actually do that. But this was a violent mob that was going to be doing it. I'm not exactly sure that was the proper way for them to do it either, if they were actually going to do that. There should have been some kind of process to go through, obviously. But these guys aren't waiting for any proof or any evidence or anything, right? They're just taking some people's word for it. That's another thing about mobs, because it says here some people yelling one thing, some people yelling another thing, and we've seen that before. Once the mob gets going, people don't even know why they're doing what they're doing.
Well, even when they killed Stephen, he had the opportunity to at least lay out his defense. Paul has no opportunity to do anything right now.
Not there. Now he's going to try to.
Right.
Yeah. Hey, George, you want to read to the rest of the end of the chapter there?
Sure. Then as Paul was about to be led into the barracks, he said to the commander, "May I speak to you?" He replied, "Can you speak Greek? Are you not the Egyptian who some time ago stirred up a rebellion and led the 4,000 assassins into the wilderness?" But Paul said, "I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no mean city, and I implore you, permit me to speak to the people." So when he had given him permission, Paul stood on the stairs and motioned with his hand to the people. And when there was a great silence, he spoke to them in the Hebrew language, saying,
We'll pick that up here in a moment. See what he said.
well, as Paul is being taken away by the soldiers, he requests the opportunity to address them and to address the people, I believe. And so he was asked if he spoke Greek, and I assume he did, with his teaching that he'd been doing throughout Asia. And that I'm not sure about this Egyptian who stirred up a rebellion. I don't know that was Paul or somebody else.
I got a footnote here I'll read in a minute. So
okay. But he says where he was born, that he was from Tarsus in Cilicia, and a citizen of no mean city. Now, I'm not sure that I know what that means.
It's not an insignificant city. So in other words, Luke kind of writes, what is that called? The diminutive or whatever. He's like, he says it kind of backwards. In other words, I'm a citizen of a great city.
Okay. And he's requesting an opportunity to address the people. And once he's given permission, then he spoke in Hebrew.
Yeah, when it's when the commander says, "Can you speak Greek?" Basically, what he's saying is, "What? You can speak Greek?" Like he was surprised to hear Greek coming out of Paul, because he's thinking he could be this Egyptian that stirred up a rebellion. And my footnote says there was a Greek assassin who had come to Jerusalem in AD 54, claiming to be a prophet. And this Egyptian had led 4,000 fanatical Jews up on the Mount of Olives, promising that at his word, the walls of Jerusalem would fall and the Roman Empire would be destroyed. Felix, the governor of Jerusalem at that time, ordered his men up the Mount of Olives, where they killed some 400 Jews and captured another 200. However, the Egyptian and some of his followers slipped away into the desert. These followers were called Sicarii, meaning dagger men. They would mingle with the crowds in Jerusalem during festivals, and they would murder pro-Roman Jews. So these guys would come and mingle with the crowds, and basically they were terrorists. And if they came across a Jew they thought that was pro-Roman, they would stab them and kill them. So he thought maybe perhaps this was who this guy was, because he doesn't know who Paul is, but he thinks maybe he was the Egyptian that stirred up that rebellion. They thought, we got him. So, anybody got anything out of chapter 21 before we move to 22? Okay. This is kind of a nice little long speech here, but maybe we'll kind of break it up in chunks. Maybe I'm not sure. Maybe it all flowed better if it's all done. But Jack, how about reading through verse 5 anyway? So.
Best friend, my protector.
Did you say me, Ray?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Brethren and fathers, hear my defense before you now. And when they heard that he spoke to them in the Hebrew language, they kept all the more silent. Then he said, I am indeed a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city at the feet of Gamaliel, taught according to the strictness of our father's law, and was zealous towards God as you are all today. I persecuted this way to the death, binding and delivering into prisons both men and women, as also the high priest bears me witness, and all the council of the elders, from whom I also received letters into the brethren, and went to Damascus to bring in chains even those who were there in Jerusalem to be punished. So, in all disclosures, it's been a while since I've read through this. I haven't really had a chance to pick it apart in the last couple of weeks. What I'm getting out of this at first blush is he is being relatable to these people, not only in their language, but it's almost as if he's saying, hey, look, I understand where you're coming from. Okay, I was the same way and it wasn't right. This is what I did. So he's setting them up to listen to the rest of it. And he's going to, I'm assuming, again, it's been a while, I'm assuming he's going to go into and explain to them what they're doing and why it's not right, and what his new mission from God is, so to speak. But he's giving them all the credentials. He's saying, hey, look, I was this, I was that, I'm from this person, I studied under this person, and to where he's being relatable. And I think that's, to me, that's the biggest thing, is when we talk to people, it's nice to be relatable to them when we're sharing the gospel to them. So that's kind of what I got in a nutshell there.
I think that's right on, Jack. And I like the way you pointed that out, to being relatable to people that we're trying to share the gospel with, because as we read this and we see history and all that, we still want to see things that apply to us. And we can all relate in the fact that we're sinners saved by grace, but the Lord has moved us past being sinners saved by grace, and has given us the Holy Spirit and changed our lives through salvation in Jesus Christ. So, and you're right, Paul's setting this up, and you notice he's starting out very politely, brethren and fathers, so he's being very respectful of the crowd there. He understands totally where they're coming from, because he's been there, right? I've been there, done that, so I know why you guys are doing this. And like I say, he's laying this on the background. I have a background, and she brings in that the high priest, probably not here at this moment, but it's like, hey, you can talk to the high priest. He'll tell you the same story, about what I was like.
Yeah.
And all the council of the elders, the Sanhedrin. And, Paul was probably actually a member of that Sanhedrin at one time. And they can vouch that I was just like you guys. I was zealous to take out these Christians. So
Well, he's basically giving his testimony.
absolutely. There you go, George. Yeah. He's definitely starting out and going back far enough to relate to those guys and giving his testimony.
Right, his sinful life, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, he's giving his testimony and showing at the same time, yeah, I was just like you guys, so hey, you could change too. Okay. Who didn't read that? Okay, I think everybody did read. Okay. Hey, Jim, would you like to read again? Start to verse 6 and go through 11. So.
Okay. Now it happened as I journeyed and came near Damascus at about noon. Suddenly a great light from heaven shone around me, and I fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to me, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? So I answered, Who are you, Lord? And he said to me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting. And those who were with me indeed saw the light and were afraid, but they did not hear the voice of him who spoke to me. So I said, What shall I do, Lord? And the Lord said to me, Arise and go into Damascus, and there you will be told all things which are appointed for you to do. And since I could not see the glory of that light, being led by the hand of those who were with me, I came into Damascus. Wow, I mean, it's one of the most famous verses in the Bible.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, if anybody didn't believe that was listening to him, that was a pretty strong way to relate to those people.
Yeah, he started back, and you notice he's already able to bring in Jesus, and he's not even really preaching to these people right now, but he's actually telling them how Jesus impacted him, right? Meeting Jesus, what Jesus did for him.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to Damascus. This great light shines around me. I fall to the ground, and this voice says, "Why are you persecuting me?" And Paul just laid out previous to this that he's been persecuting the way. That's what it's called then at the time, the way. And so he says, "Who are you, Lord? How am I persecuting you?" And he said, "I'm Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting." So Paul's laying it out right there that when you persecute these Christians, you're actually persecuting Jesus. And you think about this, these people have killed Jesus, but for Jesus to be speaking to Paul, he has to be alive, right? The dead people aren't speaking to you. So he gets all of that in there. It's all contained in there, that this Jesus had to be a resurrected Jesus, which is what the Christians have been saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
Paul is saying, I actually met the resurrected Jesus on this road. And I'd learned that with me persecuting the Christians, I'm actually persecuting Jesus. And Paul's already called him Lord, which the Jews would have been familiar with that term, This isn't like sir. This is like deity, the way they used it in those days. So when Paul's talking about who are you, Lord, he's talking about who are you, deity? Who are you, God? And he says, I'm Jesus. So all that's kind of tied up in there at one point, or in one little sentence. So.
I think on a non-cerebral level, again, he's laying some background, but he's keeping it simple and he's keeping it honest. He's being super truthful. He's not shying away from the name of Jesus.
Right.
So again, you just wow, got to remember that. Just keep it simple, keep it honest. Don't shy away from talking about Jesus.
And Paul just reiterating what we, there's a little variance here in what we read earlier when this actually happened on the road to Damascus. And in his testimony, he lays it out again. He says, so I said, what shall I do, Lord? And the Lord said to me. So Paul's laying it out right in there that Jesus is God.
That's right. I was just thinking that to myself, that in John 8, Jesus said that he is the light, but John hadn't been written yet. But by Paul making sure to point out the light, those Jews were familiar with the Psalms. So they know in Psalm 104 that God clothes himself in that unapproachable light. So by Paul telling them and reiterating that great light shone and what that he heard, I am Jesus of Nazareth, he's telling them that Jesus of Nazareth was that word that became flesh, because they should know Psalm 104 too, at least some of them.
Yes, some of them would have known that. You're right. I'm loving the way he's laying out his testimony. It's not going to be received, but still he's doing it. He's just laying it out there, and he's definitely showing who Jesus is and why he's doing what he's doing. So now, what he's doing now. George, you want to read 12 through 16? So.
Sure. Then a certain Ananias, a devout man according to the law, having a good testimony with all the Jews who dwelt there, came to me, and he stood and said to me, Brother Saul, receive your sight. And at that same hour I looked up at him. Then he said, the God of our fathers has chosen you, that you should know his will and see the just one and hear the voice of his mouth. For you will be his witness to all men of what you have seen and heard. And now, why are you waiting? Arise and be baptized and wash away your sins, calling on the name of the Lord. Well, Ananias, who's described as a devout man according to the law, and that he has a good testimony with all the Jews who dwelt there. So he's obviously got the Jewish lineage, and that he came to Paul and said, Brother Saul, receive your sight. And his sight was returned. And Ananias has told him that he is a chosen one, that the God of our fathers has chosen you, and that you are going to do his will. You have seen the just one and have heard the voice of his mouth. So he's obviously seen Jesus, at least through the light, and heard his voice directly, and that you are to be his witness. So he's to witness to all men of what he's seen and heard. And he's obviously doing that now to the people that have basically captured him. And he's telling them what they need to do. That why are you waiting? Arise and be baptized, wash away your sins, and call on the name of the Lord. So he's giving them direction of the route that they should take in order to be a Christian.
Very good, George. Yeah. part of that accusation again is, Paul pointed out, I'm a Jew. And look, there's a Jew who is a devout Jew who was greatly respected by all the Jews, not just Christian Jews, but all the Jews in Damascus had a respect for this man Ananias. And he comes to me at the direction of, I like this, he says, the God of our fathers, okay, that would go back. And he's just repeating what Ananias had told him. So this testimony that Ananias had given him, Paul's now able to share that the God of our fathers is the one who chose Paul, right? You know his will. You should see the just one. That would be a reference, of course, to Jesus, and hear his voice. And that you're going to be a witness to all men. It doesn't just say to Jews, but to all men. So, and then as you point out there at the end of 16, there it's like, okay, here's what you need to do now. Get up and get baptized to wash away your sins and call on the name of the Lord and you'll be saved. So the salvation message is right in there from Ananias. So far, the crowd's listening. So that's good. Paul so far has laid out his background. He's laid out the fact that the God of our fathers and Jesus are tied together somehow there, right? So
You notice that in this particular instance, although Paul received private revelation from Jesus, his first marching orders actually came from a brother.
yeah. Yeah, Jesus said, go into Damascus and I'll tell you what to do. It actually says, basically, I'll send somebody to tell you what to do.
Yep.
And a brother who was reluctant to do it because he was afraid of it.
Yeah. Lord, have you heard about this guy? That's basically what that you know who we're dealing with here.
He's in all the papers.
He's in all the papers. You sure, Lord, you know what you're doing? We ever do that with the Lord? You sure you know what you're doing? Oh boy. Tom, you want to read down through 21?
Yeah, where did we leave off on what, 15?
Starting at 17. So
Now it happened when I returned to Jerusalem and was praying in the temple that I was in a trance, and I saw him saying to me, make haste and get out of Jerusalem quickly, for they will not receive your testimony concerning me. So I said, Lord, they know that in every synagogue I am imprisoned and beat those who believe on you. And when the blood of your martyr Stephen was shed, I also was standing by, consenting to his death and guarding the clothes of those who were killing him. Then he said to me, depart, for I will send you far from here to the Gentiles. Well, is this, I guess this is Paul's first vision, because it's happening right after he was telling the story about him seeing the conversion. So this is Paul's first vision when him praying in a temple. You got to imagine that after a lifetime of the law he was following from Moses, being a perfect Pharisee from the tribe of Benjamin, this all must have been quite confusing for Paul right off the bat. He had said he was basically a perfect law follower from the tribe of Benjamin. They'd been doing it his whole life. So Paul must be in a little bit of a state of confusion right now. So he's praying in the temple. He falls into a trance. And lo and behold, our Lord starts talking to him again. That these guys aren't going to receive your testimony. And then Paul starts confessing right back to the Lord, Lord, I imprisoned people who believed on you. I was there when the blood of your martyr Stephen was shed. I consented to his death. Paul's confessing sins right now. The Lord didn't say anything about those, but again, he reiterated, let's look forward. he didn't say anything about, hey, what's water under the bridge, or hey, you're gonna have to do this or do that. No, the Lord didn't say anything about it. He simply just told Paul, depart, because I'm gonna send you to the Gentiles. That's all we got from the little bit you told me to read. It's interesting about Stephen's death. A little bit off topic. It's crazy what you asked me to read. Yesterday, I was doing a listening on relics, and in letter 212, this came from St. Augustine. There was two young women. They were both virgins, and this is a small excerpt from his letter because they were Stephen's body was a relic immediately after. They're using it as a relic immediately after his death. And the excerpt from the letter from Stephen, it says, even now I beg these persons to excuse me and to consider how long it would take me to relate all those miracles which the necessity of finishing the work I have undertaken forces to me to omit. These ladies carry with them the relics of the most blessed and glorious martyr Stephen. Your holiness knows how to give due honor to these, as we have done. That scholar, he's an atheist, but Bart Ehrman, he had pointed out that in the 200s, the 300s, and the 400s, there were so many miracles being done that was a large portion of the reasons pagans were converting to Christianity. So a lot of those gifts of miracles were actually passed on. And St. Augustine, and that was in 99 AD, he was writing about Stephen's body as pieces of it, at least, being used as a relic. Apparently there was miracles being done similar to what we've seen with the Elisha and his bones. It's crazy you asked me to read that. I just learned that yesterday.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, you're right. But this is Paul's first trip back to after being in. Remember, Paul was converted on the way to Damascus. He spent some time in Damascus. He spent some time in Arabia, a couple of years, maybe up to 3 years before he came to Jerusalem on his first trip. And you guys remember, he was basically, the church kind of gave him safe escort out of the city and sent him back to Tarsus. It's like, because these people here are not going to receive you. And you see, when the Lord told Paul, you need to leave and get out quickly. And it's kind of like he's almost protesting to the Lord. He says, Lord, but excuse me, I'm the perfect guy to be sharing a testimony, because these people all knew me what I was before. They all know that I was, I was chasing the Christians down. I was persecuting them. I was even there when Stephen was killed. So I should be the perfect witness here. And the Lord is saying, no, they're not going to receive your testimony here. So Paul actually ends up doing what the Lord said him to. He told him he got out of town, so he got out of town. But we can present our cases back to the Lord sometimes too, when it's give us direction and say, but here's the reason I think maybe I should go ahead and be here or do this or do that, because I got the background for it. And a lot of times we hear about people's outstanding testimonies where they were converted so much. But I think we've all seen it to one degree or another, that even the people that maybe you've been around, people get saved and you see a dramatic change in them. Not everybody accepts that. And the Lord is telling Paul that they're not going to accept it. Even though what you said is true, you did all these things, they're still not going to accept you here as being your word. So it's kind of interesting to me that
Is everybody frozen?
no.
Yeah, I said my internet connection is unstable. I guess it's back now. So. But Paul,
I see
Yeah,
Tom.
I think we're back. They kicked us all off, I think.
it kicked us out and brought us back.
That's safe.
I have no idea where we were, but anyway, it's kind of ironic to me that the Lord told Saul at the time, get out of town. They're not going to accept you. And here he is back And now he's gonna get proof again, they're not going to accept you. I mean, even the church is having a hard time accepting Paul. The leadership of the church has seemed to be pretty good shape with Paul. You know, they've accepted him. He's been back a couple times before and they were glad to hear his reports and stuff. But as we see here, when he comes back this time, it's like the church as a whole there is like, hey, we got doubts about this guy. And then he finds out that the non-believing Jews have really got doubts about this guy. So he's still not being accepted there.
Well, I think the very last line where it says, "Depart, for I will send you far from here to the Gentiles," is kind of an explanation of why he had that journey. And he left Jerusalem because he was to teach the Gentiles. Because they're complaining that he's intermingling with Gentiles, but he was directed by Jesus to do so.
Yeah, and we're going to find out. We'll find out next week what happens when it says, and we might as well look at verse 22. And they listened to him until this word. And then they raised their voice and said, away with such a fellow from the earth, for he's not fit to live. Until he mentioned that word Gentiles, he had their attention. And he really had their attention when he said that word right there. It's like, no way would God send you to the Gentiles and put them on equal footing with us. So remember, even the church had a hard time with that. The Gentiles
Right,
not having
right.
to go through all the rituals and stuff. And so basically what Paul's saying there, that you go to the Gentiles and they'll be put on equal footing. You know, they're going to be saved. And we'll have to get into that week after next, because like I say, next week I'll be camping in the church camp. So we can all dig into that pretty good. So
Those feelings of trust and security were destroyed one night.
So we'll be starting on 22 the week after?
yeah,
Okay.
let's see.